Hi everyone, welcome to this week's Admiration, where we are looking at the Nike ad, Am I a Bad Person? Which I'm sure many of you have read about over the last couple of weeks, and it's part of the Winning Isn't For Everyone campaign. We had a little bit of a debate because, being transparent, Isa and I both loved this ad. And then obviously we got the results from consumer response. So what we're all about is really understanding why how consumers react and why they react the way they do. And we debated about whether there was things to admire in this ad, and it was very clear that there were things to admire from this ad, and therefore, even though it may be, lots of people have expressed opinions on it and what it can and can't do, we wanted to dive that bit deeper to look at really what it does do well that we could learn from, as well as perhaps some of the limitations depending on what their overall strategy was. So we're going to go ahead with it. We think we can all learn something from it. Shall we dive in and watch the ad for anyone who hasn't already seen it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Am I a bad person? Tell me, am I? I'm single-minded. I'm deceptive. I'm obsessive. I'm selfish. Does that make me a bad person? Am I a bad person? Am I? I have no empathy. I don't respect you. I'm never satisfied. I have an obsession with power. I'm irrational. I have zero remorse. I have no sense of compassion. I'm delusional. I'm maniacal. You think I'm a bad person? Tell me. Tell me. Tell me. Tell me. Am I? I think I'm better than everyone else. I want to take what's yours and never give it back. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is mine. Am I a bad person? Tell me, am I? Does that make me a bad person? Tell me, does it?
It's certainly powerful. Shall we dive into how people have responded to it?
Yeah. Maybe before we look into that, we do like a quick recap of what Nike was kind of aiming to achieve with this ad. So we were looking a bit into it, and they were essentially talking about the wider campaign being the winning isn't for everyone, being almost like a tribute to the voice of the athlete, and their mentality, and kind of like when it comes to winning and what it actually takes to win. It's almost like the grit, the determination, what you mentally have to do and physically have to do to win. So it almost showcases kind of what goes on in their heads, and the kind of like individuality, selfishness, determination that it takes to like reach the levels of performance that, I mean, particularly these world-class athletes are performing at. And Nike kind of called out essentially bringing back a winner's mentality in a world where winning or wanting to win has been a bit frowned upon lately as well. So already, I guess they're playing to a bit of a controversial point where other brands are talking very highly about togetherness, and they're singling out kind of like the individuality of winning, essentially.
Yeah, and the irony within that I say we're all, I'm sure we're not all, but many of us are sat there glued to the Olympics and all of the different sports hour by hour, day by day at the moment. And actually we're all cheering on people from our country, people from other countries, people achieving amazing things that you wouldn't think possible. But I guess what's interesting is what they're doing is really calling out what it takes. So we're all very willing to celebrate the victory, but can we all be comfortable with what it takes to get to that victory, which is effectively what they're bringing to life here, which people could either appreciate and recognize, or they could find like a little bit jarring and not as kind of lovely and embracing and all of the other things that we often see related to winning. That makes a lot of sense.
So overall, I guess because the ad can be a bit quite polarizing already in its message in terms of focusing on that winning mentality and delivering it in quite a bold and powerful way, which not everyone takes it as positive. It does score kind of very much in line with the average, slightly directionally below as well, the average US ad, both in sales impact and brand impact, slightly more positively on the brand impact score there. But there are certainly some positive elements about the ad that we can call out, and there's certainly a lot to admire about it. There are obviously elements that could have been executed in a different way to make it even more successful. But the polarization was always going to be there with some people not necessarily, well, with it almost like rubbing some people the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think it comes back again to like the strategy and what you said at the start, which is, was this ever meant to be for everyone? You know, Byron Sharp says, make sure that you bring in the widest market that you can. Was this meant to do that? In which case, probably it has some limitations. Was it meant to appeal to a subgroup within that, which we can come on to talk about, in which case we definitely see it was a bit more successful. But even before diving that deep, demographically, I think you took a look, Isa, and the younger people we could have a look at responded more positively, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the brand impact score goes up massively when we look at adults under 36 years old. So you can see the younger adults responding to it a lot more positively. From an emotional perspective, they enjoy the ad significantly more than an older adult did. And you can see it reflected there that within that cohort of under 36-year-olds, specifically adults aged between 18 and 36, the ad performs in the top 30% of all ads that we tested in the US on brand impact. But yeah, and I mean, with the older adults are definitely dragging a lot of the kind of the enjoyment, overall emotion scores down there at an overall level. But overall, in terms of if we remove the contrast between the younger and the older demographics, it's definitely a captivating ad. It has a claimed attention score that's directionally above the norm, even though that's not significant. Being 90 seconds, it doesn't actually lose as many people towards the end. Whilst we see normally the ads that are like 45 seconds, 60 seconds long tend to significantly underperform when it comes to like people watching the full ad. And in this case, the ad is significantly longer than the average ad, and it still doesn't like significantly lose as many people as a long ad typically would. And it's undeniable like how distinctive it is, and people do recognize that.
Yeah, that's true. So like you're saying, for a minute and a half, however people respond to the ad, they find it hard to ignore it, right? So 80% of people, 4 out of 5 people are still there watching at the end of the 90 seconds, which is way more than we would see normally for that kind of length of ad, and highly distinctive, and something that we're not going to show here, but also the kind of ad that people want to share with their friends, send on and actually talk about, because I guess it is quite provocative. So it does give you something to talk about. It is a surprising thing. It does grab attention and it provokes a conversation, right? And that is something that they've done very successfully here. The other thing that we look at here, of course, and we saw when we looked amongst the total sample, is that overall emotion, which looks to be in line with the norm. But actually, of course, any summary scores can often hide what's really behind that. So can we dive a little bit deeper into understanding the emotional response and what we see more broadly?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the fact that the overall emotion score is in line with the norm is because there's outperformance in very strong positive emotions and quite strong negative emotions as well. So they end up balancing out what the overall emotion score of the ad ends up being. So we can see, as much as there's an overperformance on the amount of dislikes that the ad receives towards like as what it leaves people feeling overall after watching it. We've got 9% there versus an average of 3% for the typical US ad. Some confusion going on, 6% versus a norm of 3%. There's overwhelming love for it as well, with quite a big majority of people left feeling love after watching the ad rather than the negative emotions. And that is significantly above the norm as well.
Yeah, you can certainly see that polarizing piece, because normally, you'd have a few people who don't feel anything, which we don't have here at all. And then you'd have many people who would sit in the like bucket, like, it's quite nice, I quite liked it. But actually, the fact that people are sitting in love, or we've got double or treble the number of people that would dislike, be confused, surprised, as you've just gone through, it helps bring to life that real polarization that we've been talking about. But again, depending on who they're aiming to target, it's another kind of fine example of, yes, it really does command attention almost for everyone, because it's hard to look away and it's provocative. And then in terms of the positive or negative emotion, it makes you feel something. It's just that for some people that thing's bad, and for some people that thing is good. That's great. Can we look a little bit more about what people do like about it? Because obviously there are people who clearly love it. What is it that they focus on?
Yeah, I think there is a lot on like how powerful the ad feels, the delivery of it. I think as much as there's a lot of people who don't necessarily like the narration of it, or like the repetitiveness of the "am I a bad person? Tell me, am I a bad person?" The majority of people do kind of enjoy the strength of it, the power, kind of like the epic nature of the ad, how it's conveyed, and the music in the background kind of like sets the tone. It's very, very engaging, and people do enjoy as well kind of like the inclusivity of different sports and types of athletes that Nike showcases throughout. So obviously focuses on athletes that compete in both the Olympics and the Paralympics from a variety of different sports and backgrounds. So that, yeah, that's taken in quite well. So let's dive into a couple of comments here. This case about the narrative. I liked the narrative that was being spoken behind commercial that implied no matter what people think, they will fight to be the best. I like that they used the best athletes in their field. That's the thing. They kind of like focused on the best of the best to almost showcase that winner's mentality, and it was absolutely spot on. Some people obviously enjoying seeing athletes that they love. So I like seeing athletes that I know in the ad, like LeBron, Giannis, Mbappe, and more. Loved Willem Dafoe getting to be the voice of the Nike ad. So again, some people kind of interpreting his narration of it as a bad thing because he's famously known for playing the Green Goblin in the Spider-Man series, but other people feeling like it added just power to the message. I love the concept of the narration and the message that came across, as well as the imagery of the athletes, whilst the narrator describes the bad traits. Just a lot of comments on kind of like the overall high quality of the filming of it, the graphics, the background music, and so on. So visually, a very, very, very engaging ad. Obviously, from a messaging perspective, it did I think it did cause some issues for a number of respondents.
And I think this is what's interesting as well, though, because sometimes what you see is that what people like about the ad is different to what people dislike about the ad, right? So it's the fact that some people notice different things or interpret it in a different way. But what we're seeing in this case is actually what some people really love about the ad is exactly the same as what people dislike about the ad, right? So they're juxtaposing, I guess, the ugly traits that that it takes, and I don't personally think they're ugly, but the ugly traits that it takes to be successful is that you have to be single-minded, you have to be ruthless, you have to really focus, otherwise you can't win. Everyone wants to celebrate the win. They don't necessarily want to think about what that takes. Some people love that being brought to life, and some people really don't. And some people talk about, you know, am I bad? Like, of course, it's a fun way of representing it, but of course you're not bad for wanting to win, because I celebrate you when you win. Whereas for other people, maybe it's a bit of an ugly truth, and a bit of a personal one. But you know, if you, and maybe this is me being a bit defensive because I love sport and I love this ad, but actually I think what you see reflected is, yes, you have to be ruthless and single-minded and really compete once you're out there in order to do those events, and every minute of every day you have to train with that single-mindedness. But of course it doesn't mean you're a bad person, because if you watch some of the best, even from this week, obviously we had Keely Hodgkinson, like, she's ruthless. She won the 800 meters, and in her interview after the race, when they said, what's next, you've just won an Olympic gold medal, and she says, I want the world record. That's ruthless, right? But then you look at something like Simone Biles when she didn't win, and then she's there kind of bowing down to the athlete who got gold, right? So yes, she can be completely ruthless, and that's what it takes to win, but it doesn't mean that outside of that you're not a completely good person. But of course you have to put everything on the line to be a winner, and I think that's what's powerful, which I think probably brings us on to our last point, right, which is, who is the ad really successful for? Because there's clearly a subgroup in there. Yes, we looked at young versus old, but who is it? We don't even need to show the data, but who is it that really loves the ad? And we might be a bit of a hint on that.
Yes, I mean, when we looked at the people who said that they regularly practice the sports that are depicted in the ad, so things like tennis, football, running, wrestling, they enjoy the ad significantly more than the average person. They feel way more love towards the ad than the average person. So we were seeing that the overall love reaction was already quite high at 41%. Amongst those people who practice the sports that are being depicted, the love response was up to like 56%, so even higher. And yeah, and then enjoyment skyrocketed as well, amongst other measures. So it is really targeted towards kind of amateur athletes, people who enjoy being active, people who enjoy practicing sports, all the way to the most kind of elite in their fields as well.
And it makes sense. They're the ones who could more directly relate to what it takes, because even though many of the people who practice sport, and I'll include us in it, many of us who practice sport, we're like, we'll never get anywhere near like winning at those things, but we still know what we do day in, day out, even to just be amateurs at whatever we do. So that makes a lot of sense. So I guess to conclude on this one then, like, if what they were really trying to do for this ad is bring it back to Nike and its origin and everything, and really attract people who are into sport, you would expect that this would work particularly well for people who are buying more, you know, running clothing, or like more, you know, more related to sports clothing, rather than perhaps the fashion end of the clothing that Nike are in, because they're the ones that really appreciate the ad. But certainly plenty to admire here in terms of what they've actually done.
Yeah, I think like Nike was essentially going back to their roots in establishing that like really bold messaging, talking about kind of like competition, the winning mentality, and it's expanded to like on their wider campaign of the winning isn't for everyone. They've got static ads focusing on each of the athletes that they feature in the TV ad. And I think where they're trying to go back to their roots and kind of like reestablish the Nike image that was so successful back then and was kind of like the leader in sports clothing and footwear and so on. They've managed to have their brand footprint really well in the static ads. It doesn't shine as much in the video ad, and that is probably one of the biggest downfalls of that ad, and why it potentially doesn't score a bit higher as well, is that not well, it was below average people remembered the brand after seeing it. And perhaps this was a bit of an oversight from Nike, obviously with the swoosh being established as a brand asset for so many years. The fact that it was mostly present in the ad on the athletes' kits throughout, and then only had like a really, really big presence at the very end, perhaps just wasn't enough to actually drive a clear link of the Nike brand to the overall story that they were telling. Whilst, I mean, it's very, very clear in their static ads. They've got their slogan, they've got the swoosh, and it's kind of like classic Nike bold coloring, black and white, and so on. So maybe it was something for them to think about in their video version.
Yeah, but good to see at least that consistency across their campaign, and you know, focusing on the idea that winning actually can be a good thing, which is not a bad message to have. Thank you so much, Isa. That was really interesting to dive into and understand in more detail, rather than some of the headlines that we've seen, but actually to unpack it a little bit more. So thank you for the analysis, and we'll be back next week.
We will be. Thank you.